What they need to be doing instead is preparing themselves, getting prepared, because history tells us that this experiment, this American experiment, is going to go the way of all other empires.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today our special guest is returning visitor Jerry Robinson, author of Bankruptcy of Our Nation and founder of Follow the Money Daily. Jerry is here to talk with us about changes that are happening in our country and how they affect individuals in their everyday lives. Welcome back, Jerry.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I'm wondering if you could help walk us through some of the shifts or changes that have been happening in our country that affect people's liberty, their independence, their freedom, and really their ability to live their own life according to their own plan, to protect their savings, their nest egg, and to determine the well-being and livelihood of their families, and how those changes, if we can look at some specific examples of ways that may be changes to people's personal liberty, their civic liberties, their privacy, and then also what's going on with our U.S. dollar and what it used to be versus what it has become, and how that affects people's ability to really claim their independence. And then at the end, I guess if we could really talk about some specific actions that people can take despite all of these changes, knowing this, to take care of protecting their family.
Well, sure. And, I would say that we have certainly seen, as many people listening to this would agree or assent to, we have really, over the last several years, we have seen tyranny enter our nation, and it's not even wearing a disguise. Forget the disguise. The tyranny that has breached America's shores is completely naked. And we have seen this going all the way back to the very foundation of the country. We just talked about this in a recent report about how the banking interests in Europe had all kinds of incentives to see us develop a central bank, which we did in 1791 with the first bank of the first bank of the United States, followed by the second bank of the United States in 1816, and now, of course, in 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, the third central bank in America. And I'm sure most people would say, well, that's proof positive, that there is tyranny, because we have a central bank that prints money out of thin air and and then charges interest for it and sets its own interest rates for that. And of course, that's troubling. But we're also seeing the tyranny, not just in our monetary system, we're seeing it all across the board. Again, when you walk into an airport, when you walk into a sporting event. And what we're being told, of course, is that it's for our safety, it's for our own good. Now, I don't want to diminish the fact that government does have a role in keeping the people safe. Obviously, they were charged with protecting our nation's borders. That's the purpose of the military. And obviously, the government has a role to protect us and our liberties. And unfortunately, Americans have made that false choice where they believe that they have to have either security or liberty. They can't have both. And that's exactly what our founders were fearful of, that we would end up in a situation like today where we have so many people who are uneducated upon the basic, as you called it, the basic civic lessons that we forgot from high school, if we were even taught those things in high school. And so where we find ourselves now is a place where the government has come to help, that scary phrase, they've come to help, and yet the people don't know where to draw the line because they are ignorant civically. So they don't know how to manage this government that they now have. And this government, of course, is only going to go at the pace that the people allow it. And currently, the people are allowing the government to run roughshod over virtually every area of our country. And so it's incumbent upon people like you and me to do one of two things. I mean, A, we can go out and pick up picket signs. We can go out and write our congressmen. We can go out and tell Washington that they are crossing a line. Or, and I believe this is the more wise move, we can simply learn from history. And it seems as if the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. And what we learn from history is very simple, that no nation ever, under any circumstances, knows where to stop. It will continue to go until it destroys the nation itself. We've seen this over and over again throughout history, and the U.S. is not immune to this. They're going to continue to take the NSA further. If you just saw what happened in the Congress, the House just passed a bill to reform the NSA, and the contents of that bill when it was proposed initially and the contents of the bill now that it's been passed by the House look like two very different things. And I think that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where we have good intentions. We certainly want to slow the tyranny, but when it actually comes to implementing it, our government leaders are not willing to put handcuffs on themselves. It's a lot like the whole concept of people talking about how pretty soon we're going to return to gold standard, or we're going to have some global currency reset. Well, that sounds real cute. That would be real nice if we could go to a gold standard or go to some other currency. Well, the fact of the matter is that what people forget when they make those audacious claims that, oh, this is going to happen, or, oh, we're going to have a brand new currency and everything will be worthless. Well, what they're failing to understand is that the most powerful people in the world have to agree to that. The Federal Reserve has no interest in seeing any other currency besides the dollar being used, and so it's going to continue to push that, and they're certainly not going to lay down their arms unless they have a way to win. So I would say that, yes, I mean, restoring liberty is incumbent upon us, but it's also very important, I believe, to realize that history kind of repeats itself, and we are in a very negative time in the cycle of history.
Now, when you mentioned the government unwilling to put handcuffs on itself, the first thing that leapt to my mind is we're talking about a shift from what used to be or what was supposed to be to what is now, where we're headed, is exactly what I was taught in civics class, was that our country was explicitly founded because of, in response to and in rejection of the tyranny that people had fled Europe to get away from, as a government with limited powers, limited government to secure the rights of the individual. And I'm reminded of Benjamin Franklin's quote that he wrote for the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1755, "They who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And you mentioned government naturally expanding its powers if left unto itself. So what went wrong? Where did we go off the rails? Because this was supposed to be the country, America was supposed to be the country that was different, the country that didn't follow that European model, but instead embraced and stayed with limited government.
Well, you take a look at other countries that broke free from the British Empire, the British Crown, and they didn't have to do it through war. The United States picked up arms and fought against tax hikes. They fought against a penny tax upon tea. They were absolutely positively determined that no one, under any circumstances, was going to tell them what to do under any circumstances. Of course, England was very limited in what it could do to the United States from across the pond. I mean, there was of course they could send people over, and of course they had troops here. But the point of that is that the United States, although it clothes itself in this exceptional type of clothing, and it claims that it was founded on all these different ideals and all of these different principles, what we don't see throughout history is that culminating in anything. What we see instead is quite the opposite from the very beginning. 1791. As we mentioned earlier, we had a central bank, 80% of which was owned by England. So how do we really leave England? We really didn't. We had a constitution. We were in this land, but they owned 80% of our economic activity through the First Bank of the United States. So I think a lot of this concept of we have to get back to something is kind of a misnomer, because the wolves always want to eat the chickens. Wolves always want to eat chickens, don't they? I've never seen a wolf that doesn't want to eat chickens. And what do I mean by that? Well, politicians always want more power, no matter what, no matter which country you go to, no matter what flag flies above them, no matter what kind of background they might have. When you put men in power in this world, they want more power, and they're always going to want more power. And the people are always either going to give them that power by consenting, or they're going to try to stop them, either through a ballot box or through a gun. And we're finding here in America that many people are losing heart through the ballot box because they realize that Wall Street and the Federal Reserve and international bankers and major corporations and the media and all of these forces have aligned against the people because they're getting what they want. It's basic economics. There's only so much supply and there's infinite demand. Everybody wants what they want from the government, but only the people who have enough money can get it. And you and I are not those people. You and I are not going to get what we want from the government. What we're going to get is what we're told we're going to get. So therefore, it's incumbent upon us to have a plan. And I'll put it to you this way. There was a person who emailed the other day and was telling me about all of the things that Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi were doing to destroy the country. And I wrote back to this individual and I said, do you know what Harry Reid's financial plan looks like? Do you know what Nancy Pelosi's financial plan looks like? Do you realize that no matter what happens, these individuals are going to be okay? But what about you? And so what we find is that many people believe that by griping and by moaning and by pointing and by getting upset, they're actually contributing somehow to the country. Well, in fact, they're not. In fact, what they need to be doing instead is preparing themselves, getting prepared, because history tells us that this experiment, this American experiment, is going to go the way of all other empires. We have just gone far too long by raping the Treasury and realizing that we can vote ourselves benefits, and of course the corporations have got entangled. So the whole point of this is that it's incumbent upon you and I to take action, to be prepared, so to speak. And I'm sure that's the whole point of your show here.
In addition to, I want to circle back to the topic that you're introducing here of the steps people can take to take care of themselves financially. But before we leave, I wanted one last run at the question of, aren't we seeing unprecedented rates of change in loss of constitutional liberties and increases? You mentioned tyranny showing up on the shores, and you're saying it's naive to think that we can, quote unquote, get back to the good old days when we had all our liberties and everything, as though we never really had as many as we perhaps thought we had. But is it not true that there's been an acceleration in recent decades, or is it just that we're more aware of it now through media and that sort of and online media, that people are more aware that with governmental czars and all kinds of our leaders just skirting the law? Is that something you're saying has been going on at the same rate forever, or do you think there really has been a shift in recent years?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can go out to Colorado and I can smoke drugs. I can go into any institution around the country and abort my child. I can have there are still quite a few liberties that I would say make no sense that we actually have today based upon what we're thinking about. I mean, when we take a look at the overall system, yes, we do see a tightening of the noose, so to speak. But at the same time, we are, in many ways, as John Rubino has pointed out before, a very ungovernable type of people. This may sound very bizarre because typically we come at all of this from our perspective. We say, well, We need more rights. We want the government to give us this. We want them to give us that. But think about it from the government's point of view. Think about it from where they stand. They are in charge of running this entire country. What's the easiest way to do that? To pass lots of laws and restrictions and put people in place to watch over it, or just to take care of it as things happen? Well, when the government has as much money as they do coming in, they have a lot of spare time. And so what they do is they micromanage the entire economy, and they micromanage the entire government. And that's what we're seeing. The more government employees that we see moving into Washington, the more regulation that we see. And from their perspective, they're doing a good job. From their perspective, they are trying to govern the people. And I think this is missed often by people like you and I, that in many ways, they're not necessarily, I guess there's a few that are probably in the back room scheming, but overall, the government is really trying, I think, to do something very impossible, and that is to herd cats. They're trying to rule over this entire country, and they're trying to do it within the context of this quote-unquote liberty. I think it's a farce. I think it's a complete farce. I mean, if I just boil it down, I tell you, I think it's a complete farce. I don't think that this government is interested in seeing everybody have freedom. Nor have I ever thought that. I don't think that we go back to the very beginning, nor do we see that. I mean, this is, of course, a very cynical view of history, but I believe that it's a very true form of history. One great book to read on this topic, of course, for your folks is G. Ober Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which shows from the very inception of this country, there has never been a pure intention in Washington, ever, under any circumstances. This concept that somehow we need to go back to that time to fix the solution, I think is a misnomer. But yeah, the rate of change is certainly picking up, but so is the rate of crime, and so is the rate of things that have to be controlled.
So getting it back to the individual domestic castle then of people's homes and their own lives that they're trying to bring some order to, just as you mentioned, the government faces perhaps an insurmountable challenge of trying to, if their goal is to control and to herd the cats of an uncontrollable, ungovernable people, in the same sense, the individuals, folks in their lives, in their homes, may feel that it's out of their control. It's impossible for them to try to control these forces that are bigger than them, richer than them, more powerful than them, more long seated in them, that are determining a lot of the environment that we're living in. So if we can't directly influence that on our individual basis, then what can we do? What are some specific things that individuals can do to make sure that they're taking care of business at home?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to certainly have a paradigm shift in your mind, and I think the paradigm shift becomes: has Washington ever been looking out for me? Does Washington really want me to have freedom of speech? Does Washington really want me to be equal with everybody? I mean, do we really believe this fairy tale? Or instead, what is it really? Is Washington simply wanting more power and more power and more power? And I think that's the first thing that we have to get into our minds, because otherwise we end up in a state where we are on a sinking ship, we're on the Titanic, so to speak, and we find ourselves arguing over the bill because we got charged for an extra drink as the boat is sinking, right? We want to talk to the maitre d', we want to talk to the captain of the ship. We want to know who hit the iceberg. We want to find out who's to blame. We want to find out, well, how come we can't keep this ship up? How come wasn't this ship supposed to be going this way? And how come it hit the iceberg? And who's responsible? Well, listen, those are moot questions. The first question, where is the lifeboat? That's the very first question I have. The second question is, where's my family? Because I have to get them onto the lifeboat. And so the concept here is that, first of all, we have to shift our mind into thinking that someone else is going to fix this, or that somehow through picket signs we can fix it. Instead, what we have to do is, in many ways, unattach ourselves and our minds from this government.
I heard a motivational speaker, this was over decades ago, but very effective and very impactful in my life and the company I was working at the time. And he was giving a scenario of talking about personal empowerment and needing to take accountability for our own lives. Reminded me exactly what you were just saying. He said, we were mistaught through fairy tale after fairy tale that the fairy godmother is going to come and wave the magic wand and make it all better. And she says, folks, if you're still waiting for her, she's not coming. So you've got to be your own fairy godmother. You've got to take accountability, responsibility, and decide what changes you're going to make, what actions you're going to take in your own life.
Exactly right. And so what that means is it's going to take some work. I'll tell you what we've done is we left a very major populated city and moved to a region that we thought was going to be safe, just strategically safe. And we're growing a massive garden. We're doing a lot of the things that we've always known deep down we needed to do. I'm referring to my wife and I. And now we're preparing. And I think it's incumbent upon people who are listening to this program to realize that if they really believe that this ship is sinking, then there really is no other option but to begin preparing. I mean, that is the obvious solution. And so preparing means thinking about all of your sources that are required for life. What about your electricity? What about your food? What about your water? What about your income? What about your all of your debt? You want to begin to think about how do I reduce my lifestyle in such a way where I am not dependent upon the system, because the way the system is built now, and raising children today is obviously one of the most major challenges because our children are so susceptible and vulnerable to the attacks that come at them every single day from the advertisers and the media. But we're taught from the very beginning of from being born that we have to have other people doing everything for us. How do you know that you're rich in America? How do you know that you are prosperous and that you've arrived? Well, you don't grow your own food. That's kind of menial labor to have a garden, isn't it? I mean, isn't that menial labor to go out and actually have to pick food off of the ground? Let's just pay someone else to do that. How else do we know that we're prosperous in America? Well, we don't have to mow our own lawn, or we don't have to do many of these things that we have suddenly outsourced. I think about it whenever I was younger. I never had a moment ever, and I'm sure you didn't either, and maybe you did, but where I actually was confronted with the option of either A, I'm going to produce all of the things that I want to consume, or B, I'm going to outsource all of my production, and I'm going to consume the things that other people make. And that never really was a decision that you and I ever had to make. We simply knew from the very beginning that we were going to outsource most of our production. I'm not going to build a chair. I'm going to buy a chair. I'm not going to build a bed. I'm going to buy a bed. I'm not going to grow a banana. I'm going to buy a banana. That's what we do. We buy everything. And so when this system finally breaks down, that system itself is going to break down. And the people, and this is what I'm concerned about, the people who understand and realize that the ship is sinking, I pray and hope that they also realize that also means they're going to have to turn themselves from 100% consumers to producers. And I think that shift from a consumer mindset to a producer mindset changes everything. When you think about this and you look around the nation, and you see all of the advertisers and all of the merchants and all of the corporations and all of the financial institutions and how they've taught us to consume and consume and go into debt. Really what they have done for us, for you and I, if we want to be producers, is they have created a vast amount of demand from consumers. Therefore, it should be easier than ever today to become a producer and make money. And it really is true, because the majority of people today don't know how to produce. They consume. So if you become a producer, suddenly you're able to make money. And if you're able to make money, you can create a financial plan. And if you can create a financial plan, you can weather the storm that lies ahead.
So what you're describing, Jerry, is this shift within each of our minds from being a consumer mindset to a producer mindset and taking responsibility for providing the things that our families need. And it occurred to me when you were describing that that some of those steps that people can take, or maybe all of them, can be taken in advance, proactively. And when we do things proactively, it's much more enjoyable. It's much lower stress. We have more options to choose from. There's this rich array of choices we have. We can take things on, try it out as a lifestyle change, as a hobby, and that sort of thing. And the contrast is being thrown into a lurch of doing it reactively. If we wait too long, and nobody can tell you what too long is. I really appreciate the quote that I heard at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium where someone said, "I'd rather be 7 years early than 1 day late." And when we look at being reluctant preppers, there can be a strong inertia to what we're accustomed to, what we were brought up with, and what we've grown up relying on as these systems that we can consume from. But I'm thinking back to a homeschool field trip we made. We had visited some friends of ours to do some apple pressing. They worked at an apple orchard, and we were able to do some apple pressing for apple cider making. While we were there, they showed us how they make their own bread at home in large quantity batches with a wheat mill and a dough making machine, and made 40 loaves of bread in a day kind of thing. And we started doing that. We got the equipment and started doing that. So we'd buy 100-pound sacks of wheat from a local bakery and mill our own wheat, and our kids would help out with that, and we'd have people in the kitchen working on making the dough, another batch in the oven, and we'd keep this whole pipeline going. Saturday we could make 40 loaves of bread, put them in the freezer. And when we took a homeschool field trip, as we often did with a larger group of other families, we went to that bakery where we bought the sacks of wheat from, and we went down in their basement milling room, and they opened up the side hopper door of the huge hopper that fed the wheat berries into the milling machine, and they pulled out a double handful scoop of the wheat berries and held them out. And you should have seen that crowd of children in the room lean forward in great interest and amazement about something that they had never seen before. Wheat. They had never seen wheat before in its natural form. And our kids turned to me and shrugged, and they were quizzical about their friends' behavior, because this was routine to them. This was run-of-the-mill, yeah, Dad, wheat. They kind of shrugged their shoulders and looked at me with a kind of wrinkled nose like, what's going on here? Because they couldn't understand how unfamiliar this was to their friends. And yet, in 100 other ways, I've heard people not being aware that French fries come from potatoes, for example, and things like that. It's just we're so disconnected from the real source of our sustenance. And it made me think about, as in anything else in life, the steps that we take because we want to are not stressful. It's energizing, it's exciting, it's interesting, it's fun. But the steps we take in an emergency situation, because there's a crisis and we have to, can be extremely stressful and very negative and much more costly and have much fewer options. And I wondered if you could just speak a little bit about some of those proactive choices that you recommend when you talk with people, that they can make. They can start small, take those first few steps. Here's a few things you can start doing on your own while there's still time.